Welcome to First Reading, the Old Testament lectionary podcast for preachers, teachers, and curious readers of the Hebrew Bible. I'm Rosy, an assistant professor of Hebrew Bible at Wake Forest University.
And I'm Paul Essin, a PhD student, soon to become a PhD candidate at Yale University. Co-hosts Rachel and Tim are not here with us. They are off this week, but we are here. We are in the midst of ordinary time in the RCL, 12th Sunday after Pentecost, August 31st, 2025. And our first reading in the thematic readings is either Proverbs 25, 6-7, or Syriac 10, 12-18. So, Rosy, what are you thinking? Where's your heart and mind?
Well, first of all, Paul, we should probably remind our listeners we were doing our summer shorts, and now we are in our full episode format. So, we have a little bit more space and time to explore the thematic readings, which is what we've been doing with Ordinary Time in Year C in this season. And our thematic readings, as Paul said, are in Proverbs and Sirach, so both wisdom books.
Yeah.
But the theme, as you look at the readings, right? So our thematic reading is from Proverbs, and then we also have Psalm 112, which we'll talk about, and has a wisdom thrust to it as well. The epistle reading in Hebrews chapter 13, and then our gospel reading in Luke chapter 14. And I'm going to suggest that the lectionary readings, the thematic readings in particular, require the kind of gospel focus to help us understand why it's being paired with the first reading as it is, right? So That's all a preface to say why I am going to focus on Proverbs chapter 25, verses 6-7, even though if you decide to go with Sirach, right, which is a less familiar book for your congregation, and a few more verses 12-18 there, the theme is the same, though. I'll say that both Sirach and Proverbs 25, verses 6-7, are looking at the theme of pride. And so when we are looking at these passages, it's helpful to have that sort of thematic idea in your brain, because it kind of helps us understand why these readings are curating the kind of conversation that they are around this theme of pride.
Nice.
So the Proverbs reading is pretty straightforward, only 2 verses, right? So, and the reading is basically a traditional wisdom saying about modesty, right? In the story, there's an invitation, right, to be able to go to a feast. And the idea here is that you should be wise by taking the lowest place. Don't take a high place before the king. Don't seat yourself, but wait to be invited to a higher place of honor, lest you make the wrong choice and be shamed in the community, right? So a really pretty practical idea, which is, take the lower place. Don't assume your spot in the world, right? Don't put yourself forward before the king. Take the low seat. And to deliberately take a low position might be a smart and tactical and strategic thing, especially in the context of the king, right? You want to let him call the shots, and I'm deliberately using the masculine pronoun here. It's a very strategic idea, right? So we're just going to say that there is an ancient context here, one which everyone reading this would have recognized, in that everyone lived in this kind of a power structure, right? So it will take some work for preachers to maybe think about, well, how does this work in our modern world where there is also a similar kind of idea of who is sitting at the head of the table in your conference room, in your business kind of context, in your, well, dare I say it, your church, right? Who holds power? So it's not so foreign, and, hopefully you'll be able to kind of bridge that ancient modern divide rather easily, right? So really straightforward as you look at the Proverbs reading, but I want to maybe push into this idea of pride.
I was going to say, I think there is an assumed definition of pride here, right? And that, I think, assumes that pride is this thing that you do to yourself by taking a position that is not yours. And the default position in this case is the top ward position. But that might be, I think, consistent with most cultures, there are also definitions of pride. That is, if you are naturally or socially on that level of hierarchy and you take an alternative like downward position, that might also imply a certain level of pride. It's a definition of pride in my thinking, right?
No, I think you're right? I think, and this is also kind of helpful in that I think if you are just straightforwardly maybe looking at this proverb and being like, oh, I should just always take the lowest place, right? I should just, in any room, just put myself down, right?
Yeah.
That is actually not a very wise application of this
Of the
teaching, right?
passage, right? Yeah.
Yes. In fact, I think what you're also pointing to is that's a form of pride as well. You actually in your head assumed that you are the highest, and now you tactically took the lowest, but everyone in the room knows, in fact, that you
But you are
should
not.
be, higher, right? And
Yeah.
so really the joke is on you.
It
You
is.
haven't really done anything other than expose yourself and your own large awareness of the power
Exactly what I'm
structure.
saying. Exactly what I'm
Right.
saying.
Exactly what you're saying, Paul, right? So again, this is one of those things where you look at wisdom and you really want to think about what is it trying to teach you. And this is where I think the gospel is really helpful paired with this reading,
Mhm.
right? So you can get a really kind of obtuse reading of this, which is I'll just always take the lowest place.
Yeah.
But that is going to backfire on you very quickly, I think.
Mhm.
The Luke passage is very specifically actually kind of looking at Proverbs 25, verses 6-7, right? So the beginning of that parable that Jesus tells is about a dinner feast, right? He talks about this person who is taking the kind of the seat of honor and is then being embarrassed, right?
Mhm.
And in fact, what Jesus says is what you should do
Mhm.
is that if you are throwing a party, you should be inviting not the biggest people, not the people that everyone expects on your guest list, but you really should be going for surprise guests, right?
Yes.
And I have to acknowledge that the way that Jesus describes these guests is extremely ableist, right? So it is it's an ancient context, right?
It
So
is.
for your congregations that read that you should invite the quote poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind in verse 13. And then Jesus goes on to say, you'll be blessed because they can't repay you, for you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous, right? This is a kind of an ancient context in which these are the poorest, the outsiders, the marginalized, lowest of society. And it's difficult to imagine these people in a place of wealth or status, right?
Yeah.
That, thankfully, is not true of our world today. It's clearly people that have different abilities also have wealth. But similarly to the ancient world, there is a sense that people that are differently abled might not be on the top of the guest list. That is not so different from 2,000 years ago.
That's right.
So the idea here still goes around that the table is a place where we practice certain virtues. What Jesus is talking about is this sense that the table that we share, and now I'm going liturgically, right? To think about this idea of what does pride look like as we look at the table that is in the center of most of our churches and our traditions, is that we share a table together.
Yes.
And what does that table in your congregation look like, right? Who gets served first? Who presides? Who feels like the outsider at that moment when they're being invited to the table?
Yep.
And I think there's a real invitation here to think about how do we hold modesty in our congregation? Who feels like they belong?
Yeah.
Who feels like, they have to take the lowest seat because that's where they belong. They maybe belong on the margins or on the outside. They haven't been to church in a while. They aren't the ones that are being invited to give the talks or being invited to interpret the scripture, or being invited to be the ushers to take up the plates, right? So as we think about just the hierarchy of our own worship worlds, this is, I think, what Jesus is pointing to, is that the table is not just a place where we feel comfortable, but it should be a place where we stretch.
Yeah.
A place where we're asked to be generous.
Yeah.
A place where we're maybe asked, in a way that gives us some spiritual workout.
Yeah.
Who belongs at this table, and how do we practice charity?
Yeah.
Our table, right? So I think this is what the gospel passage then helps us come back to the Proverbs passage and not use it as this kind of ham-fisted way of showing my modesty and my humility by taking the lowest place.
Yeah.
But in fact, it asks us to do more questioning about the way that we hold social value, right? Who do we respect?
Yeah.
Who do we want to sit next to? Who do
Yeah.
we share our bread with, right?
Yeah.
These are the questions that these passages are asking, right? And this is where I might want to ask preachers to also look at Psalm 112, right? Which is the psalm paired with this reading.
Yes.
And there it begins with the fear of the Lord, right? This word yareh. That is what establishes a person. And it kind of twists this idea of humility and pride, because there, the psalm really, really praises the righteous person that distributes wealth, that gives loans freely, that is generous, that lends, right? And ironically, it's those who give freely who are the firmest,
Yeah.
who are the most secure, who are the most steady and unafraid to face the kind of ups and downs of life.
That's right.
What the psalm calls evil tidings in verse 7, right? That
Yep.
person can stand firm.
Yep.
They can handle when their bank book goes low or when they suddenly have great riches, right? It doesn't make them flip who they are deep within, right? They know who they are. They are
Right.
secure in God.
Right.
And that's where their hope is, right? Not in their wallets, not in their credit card, not in their credit score, but in those things that are firm, right? And that's where this idea maybe of pride and humility, this tension that we've been talking about, we might think about what that looks like in our modern world, right?
Exactly what I'm thinking too, Rosie, because like giving us really good context in the biblical world and especially drawing in the gospel passage, I think it does really disrupt everything, because like your language of the table is the place where we are stretched value-wise and who we think belongs and who that we think doesn't belong. It even like disrupts the entire hierarchy of who is at the top, who is below. And that's fantastic. But if we transport definitions of pride and humility and what it takes to be humble in our modern context, what would it look like? What forms would it take if it travels through culture, right? What forms would it take? How would it show up in different spaces through different cultures? Early on, we were talking about like in our contemporary world of social media, for instance, and personal branding. What would pride and humility look like? Especially when we think about that in light of honesty, and sincerity with one's self, you know?
I think you're pointing to exactly what I hope preachers will think carefully about, right?
Yep.
How do we translate this to our congregations? Because we live in a hustle culture.
We do.
Grind culture, right?
Yeah.
Where you're expected to toot your own horn. You're
Yeah.
expected to let everyone know what your accomplishments are. And we're not apart from that, right? Paul and I occupy the academic world, which,
We
if
are.
anything,
Yes.
operates very much on the idea of pride, right?
We do.
In our scholarship, in our voice, in
Yeah.
our publications, right? I
Yeah.
mean, and this is how the pecking order is established
It's a
in our world.
requirement for the most
It's
part.
right. There's a respect that's given to the super productive
Yes.
person, right? But the difference between somebody who puts their faith in their number of publications versus someone who like really, deeply knows who they are, the training, the gifts that they have been given, and they give those gifts to the world
Yeah.
freely.
Yeah.
Out of joy in the kind of playfulness of ideas. So one of the examples that I wanted to kind of share was my own sense of being a professor and looking at the nuances of humility and pride in that. Paul, you and I were talking about before we started recording, there are cultural norms around pride and modesty, right? And for me, I'm especially aware of the idea of gender and culture as we think about this, right? Because women, especially within the church, who have been raised maybe in conservative cultures, are given this kind of sense that pride means that you do not speak up, right? Especially in mixed context, right? You don't offer your knowledge first. You wait until you're asked.
Yes.
Now, there might be some wisdom to this, but in a situation where, I am a classroom professor, right? It is not modest for me to take the back seat or for me to pretend that I don't know certain things or I don't have certain responsibility toward my students,
By all
right?
means. Yeah.
So in that way, like I want to kind of help us think about and help preachers also think about what does it mean to be truly humble,
Yeah.
right? To be humble does not mean to hide your gifts
Yeah.
or to pretend that you don't have any gifts.
Yeah.
Because you are alive, you are a gift.
Yeah.
You are by definition a gift. Now, true humility is to really kind of search out the depths of that
Yeah.
and to understand what those gifts are and to give them out of joy,
Yeah.
out of your fear of the Lord, right? Out of your reverence.
Yes.
So I think, as we think about this, it's worthwhile to think about our cultural and our gender ideas of what it looks like to be humble.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
actually that song, Be Humble, is playing in my head right as we're talking about this, right? Is because that song is also asking questions about be humble, right?
Yeah.
And that idea. What does it mean scripturally? What does it mean culturally? What does it mean today?
Yeah.
To really be humble is to also know that you belong because God made you, that your gifts are needed, and that you are a contribution, right? You have contributions to make. That's humility.
That is. And I think there's something also about the courage. You talk about dishonesty, but there's also courage, right? The courage to be seen, and to be present. Again, not in this sort of haughty, prideful way, but in a way that is naming how true you are and you are being to who you are as a person, but also what you know and what you carry and how that is shared and can be shared with people in a way that resists, arrogance, right? And it's actually truthfully engaging, so that all of us are uplifted as a community from your gift and from your pressing. And I think it's something that is also deeply cultural because there are cultures that discourage that courage to be seen, right? And it makes humility something of being invisible, and it honors shyness and it honors timidity to the extent that is honored and is misplaced and is sort of mistaken to be humility. Like you are being humble because you are intentionally quiet, or you are whatever.
And I think that's such a valuable line to hold, right? So it might be something that preachers would think about offering to their congregations, an open question on what it looks like to be truly humble.
Yeah.
And it when you see it, right? That's the other kind of thing, is being around really humble people gives people courage. It makes people want to speak.
Yeah.
That's such a valuable thing to be, to be somebody that is so secure in who you are that others feel secure around you. Yeah. And they can be more fully themselves and be more authentic themselves because you yourself are authentic, right? So that's where I think these passages are curating a conversation for our congregations around this kind of mature idea of what it means to be truly humble, and that is grounded in God.
Yes. It means, to sum it up, it means to be disruptive of the hierarchies of who belongs, who doesn't belong. But it's also honesty. It's also, courageous visibility. It means resistance towards modern misconceptions and misreadings of what it means to be visible, right? But also mixing all of that with genuineness and grounding it in God. That's truly fascinating. I like that.
I love it too. I was like, if only Christians were known for that.
Shall we call it a wrap?
I think it sounds like a great place to stop.
Thank you so much for doing the hard work, Rosy.
You are very welcome.
Friends, we hope that you found something really helpful in that discussion today. As always, remember that you can find a backload of several episodes from practically every passage that's ever showed up in the lectionary on our website, bestreadingpodcast.com. And while you're there, take a look at our mesh, make a donation if you would like, leave us a comment or a review so that other people might also benefit from the work that we do here. Until next time, my name is Paul Essa.
And I'm Rosy Canethal. Have a happy week of preaching. Bye.
Have a happy week preaching.